All right. Well, why haven't we caught the January 6th pipe bomber yet? Why were highly trained FBI agents tracking this case for months and then suddenly reassigned to boring-ass desk jobs, spending time at their desk playing Oregon Trail or looking up holiday Diwali recipes? I made that part up, of course. They're working hard. But it seems like someone was trying to hide something. These FBI agents were getting too close to the truth, and it seems strange, right? Especially when in just a few short hours, we got the lone gunman who allegedly totally worked alone to kill Charlie Kirk, who totally texted his gay lover with specific details about the murder right as he was being chased by police. He stopped and gave a whole flurry of text messages. Case closed. Don't ask any more questions. We were even lucky to have Kash Patel fly into Utah to show how responsive the FBI was. The FBI was all over it. We got this. But 4 years later, still no pipe bomber caught. Yesterday, the FBI released new, higher quality video of the 2021 DNC and RNC pipe bomb suspect as it renewed a $500,000 reward for information leading to this arrest. Here's the video. Our next guest says, if you can't find a person who dropped explosives in our nation's capital despite using mobile devices being captured on camera and leaving physical evidence behind, you are too corrupt or too incompetent to exist. They should close the FBI. That person is FBI whistleblower Kyle Seraphin. Kyle, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Good to see you guys. Yeah. And you know what? I got to be really upfront with my bias because I hate the FBI, and I hate it more today than I did yesterday, even because I saw some additional articles, which we may even just throw out there. The FBI is a walking, breathing, flexing First Amendment violation, and it doesn't matter who's in charge, and they're not going to solve this case. So that $500,000 is really safe. I just want to let everybody know, in case they're worried that their federal tax dollars might be going to pay somebody for finding a pipe bomber from January 6th. Don't worry about that. They're totally good.
So you're furious because, I mean, you were on this task force. You were actively working the January 6th case. Suddenly, then you were pulled off, put at a desk job, and you've been asking, well, why did it take this long now to get this high definition video? Friend of the show, Steve Baker, says, we have their phone data, like their cell phone data, but you won't even release the full 17 to 18 hours of this footage with these two cameras. Like, what is the FBI hiding here? What do you make of that part of the story? Why not release all of this video?
So the FBI is hiding what happened. That's really obvious to anybody that's paying attention. And there's an analogous case that happened in 2018, which I was in the FBI during that time, between March 2nd and March 21st. And I had a long discussion about this on my podcast this morning. But the FBI found a pipe bomber who was throwing out explosive devices, mailing them through FedEx, and attempting to kill people. And it took 19 days. And that person is now dead. So they've done that. They did it in 2018. They did it with less technology than existed in 2021. They did it with less political pressure, and they did it in Austin, Texas, which is nowhere near as surveilled and I would say critically important when it comes to the number of federal assets, security cameras, federal agencies, take your pick, not to mention the fact that January 6th was apparently a really big deal. And the dropping of explosives next to politically sensitive targets would be the most terroristic thing that happened on that day, bar none. Nobody could argue otherwise. So if they didn't show you what happened, and they haven't released this video up until now, I've got a really dark suspicion about what happened. Can we get kind of, it's not conspiratorial per se, but can I do a little bit of kind of like my own kind of analysis on this? Because I think this is what actually happened.
You worked at the FBI. You worked on this case. If there's one person that I would say, yes, run with it, please. What is your assessment of this?
All right. Let me broadly say what my association with the case was. On January 6, 2021, I got leave. I got leave to go and do a shooting class, and I was up with state police officers and some SWAT team guys from Maryland. I was in Frederick, Maryland, but I was assigned to the Washington field office. I worked for a team that was called the Special Operations Group, or ID, is that right? ID 21, which was the Intelligence Division 21 squad. And what we did was surveillance all the time, full time. Thousands of hours a year. We watched bad guys of various kinds. Sometimes it was BS. Sometimes they were really bad. Sometimes they were child traffickers. They were MS-13 guys that had cut up people with a machete. Sometimes they were a lady that the FBI wanted to bump and talk to because maybe she knew something about her boss's white-collar fraud. It was an entire gamut of that. And the crazy thing is that every time that we had a big event in D.C., which was frequently, it would be 4th of July, it'd be the March for Life, it'd be the State of the Union, every inauguration, they did this thing called an NSSE, a National Special Security Event. And that's where DHS, specifically the DHS entity called Secret Service, would make a declaration that we were going to call it an NSSE, and everybody would get an all hands on deck. And so all leave was canceled and all of the local overtime was paid for by the feds, and everybody would step up and they would make sure that we had a secure environment so that First Amendment liberties were protected. And that meant that you had FBI plainclothes people walking around in the crowds, and you had some that were in suits that were ready to go do interviews, and you had ATF, and you had the Department of Energy flying around out there with drones, and they'd be driving in their trucks looking for dirty bombs, and everybody was there. Everybody was available to stop riots, to stop explosives, to stop terrorist attacks, to make sure people could do what they wanted, which was have their say, be able to participate. January 6th was not declared an NSSE. That was step number one. That was weird. So I was allowed to be on leave. And when we got back, they tasked my team with a person of interest. Now, I got every variety of garbage from the FBI when it came to go find this person and watch them. And they would say, go pattern their life. Just find out what they do. And you go, oh, okay. So we'd ask about the case and we'd get various amounts of details. How do you know this person is involved? What's, this and that. The story we got on January 6th with the person of interest that we followed for January 6th was incredibly specific and really, really capable. The person that you're showing on the screen that's wearing the hoodie supposedly left the DC area on a DC Metro car. That's the public transportation system. That means they went through a turnstile that had cameras looking just like that, was able to be traced all the way through, leaving the area with a time-coded DC Metro card. That card was bought with a credit card, and I was told it was bought a year prior and had never been used up until that point. That's really specific. That's oddly specific, and I remember it 4 years later that I was briefed on this stuff. We were also told that that same card was used to exit a facility in Falls Church, Northern Virginia, on the other side of the Potomac, and was picked up by a car that had a license plate where the license plate and the user of the credit card were in fact the same person. So same address, same name on that license plate and on the card. Now, that doesn't mean that that person was the owner of the car or that person was the owner of the credit card, but it means that that's a pretty darn good place to start. And that's what they had us watching out in Northern Virginia for about 4 or 5 days. So we sat out and watched a house to no avail. We got additional information about this person. Association with the Air Force. Some of the information they had on scene was a little bit off. I found out after the fact because I've looked this person up and I have his name sitting on my computer. I don't believe that the person that we were watching was the person that we're seeing on the screen wearing the hoodie. But I do believe that there's a decent chance that that person knew. And I do not know, and I don't actually trust the FBI went out and did an interview because I asked to do an interview. I said, let's just go knock on the door. Let's just go knock on the door and ask some simple questions. I was in the Air Force. I can talk to people that were in the Air Force. Let's just try to do a basic knock and talk and see what's going on. Wouldn't we want to start anywhere if we have nothing? And we got pulled off that case. We got sent back to our offsite. I was sat at a computer where they gave me garbage leads that came in from people who called into the 1-800-FBI tips line and said, my neighbor Clayton is a jerk and he thought Ronald Reagan was cool and he likes things that are libertarian or he doesn't think Joe Biden's a good choice. And so you should go get him because he was probably at January 6th. And so I threw out at least 100, maybe 200 or 300 of those leads that came in. I lost count of them. But every time that I would read them, they would be garbage. They would be predicated on nothing. And so I would eliminate them from my queue. And I did that for a little while. And eventually I was able to take paternity leave and leave that field office. And I never went back. And as far as I know, and I know up until like a couple of weeks ago, they never put somebody back on that guy to watch him again. Because my friends were on that team. So here's
never
what
went, knocked on the door, never
Correct.
went and asked
as far
questions.
As I know.
And you believe 100% that that is not the guy that we're seeing in this video. So why now?
Correct.
I mean, we see this video, high definition video. There's a voiceover that the FBI released with this whole video. They even added music. They added like creepy music to it, like somebody in their sound engineering.
Video. Like, They did this video in January. People can find it in my X feed. It's at Kyle Seraphin. If you guys want to go see them side by side. They actually released this video, identical video, in January of this year, trying to say like, hey, we're still working on this pipe bomber nonsense. And then they did it again yesterday, and it has 2 more minutes of footage, but that's the only change. It's the same graphics. It is the same sort of creepy atmospheric music, as you mentioned. There's the same voiceover and the same discussion. So all of those things are identical. The only difference is they added a little bit more footage. And here's what I actually think happened. You mentioned Steve Baker. His partner in crime is a guy named Joe Hanneman. Hanneman was at Epoch Times for a little while, now works for The Blaze. And they released a story about 2 weeks ago that disrupted the FBI's attempt to try to pass this off as a training exercise. They wrote a story, and we have it on pretty good authority that the senior executives in the FBI, the 7th floor, so that's going to be your people that are the public affairs types and the Bongino and the Patel, they had a plan to basically go forward and say, this was a training exercise. We've run it to ground, and we have found out that the person, it was just a bad timed thing, and nobody should read anything into it. No big deal. And the problem with that is it's pretty apparent from some of the research. Now, it's single source, but it's a very good source that Baker and Hanneman have shown is that the person who dropped those devices very likely actually moved one of the devices more than once and may not have been the final person to touch said device, and also went into 2 different congressional office buildings, according to the surveillance footage that they've been able to review. And we'd be able to find out very clearly what happened because the FBI has had the footage, you mentioned 17, 18 hours or so, that's from the DNC's building. The cameras that we've seen, some of them are actually they don't belong to U.S. Capitol Police or any other federal entity. They actually are part of the party system. So the DNC's is a non-governmental agency. And we have never seen what happened to the device during the time between that placement that we're seeing on screen and then when it was discovered, because it would have obviously be found in any sweep. Dan Bongino said that very clearly when he was a podcast guy. He was like, yeah, they would have walked out there. There's no way they would have missed this. Their dogs are too good. The handlers are too good. There's some pretty serious evidence that this is a multi-department governmental cover-up. So here's what I actually think the wider thing looks like. I think that either U.S. Capitol Police or congressional staffers were involved in the placement of these devices. For whatever reason, we're speculative, but maybe it was a distractionary tactic. Maybe it was part of a training exercise, but they left them. It doesn't really make a difference what they were. That's what went down. They were discovered by U.S. Capitol Police officers. That's actually very clear. Tom Massey has said that on record now. Baker has also identified this to be the case. And nobody seemed to be all that worried about these particular devices. And then the FBI was the mop-up crew. And they came in and they grabbed all the video footage and they did all the prosecutions, and the DOJ was the ones that ended up putting, probably almost 2,000 people in the criminal justice system. And they've wrecked thousands of lives. I mentioned this morning as well, but people's lives will never recover. There are some that have still not been pardoned. Guys like Joe Biggs, they're still out there waiting. Purple Heart veterans, retired, lost their pension, lost their access to the VA hospitals, are considered, PNG by anybody that's reputable in media simply because of this. They cannot do work. JD Rivera just got kicked off a job the other day. I've interviewed him as well, also at J6er. So a lot of people's lives were upended by this, and the DOJ was the mop-up crew. I don't think they had undercover agents the way you think, not from FBI, in the crowd. And the reason that would be is because you wouldn't want to compartmentalize that problem. You wouldn't want to have the same agency that set up the bowling pins be the one that goes in and knocks them down and prosecutes them. So the odds are there were people, there were likely instigators, and I think we're going to see some of that stuff come out from the guys over at The Blaze as well. I'm kind of monologuing on this, but let me just say, I am more furious with them releasing this because what they're trying to do is rebrand garbage from January because we screwed up their narrative. I'm trying not to swear. We screwed up their narrative really aggressively a couple of weeks ago by exposing that you can't call this a training event and then keep the FBI open, because it means they covered for something they've known for literally years at this point.
Right. I mean, your great point. I mean, adding these 2 additional minutes of footage here, why not just release all of it? Like, if you have this additional footage that you're just sitting on, release that, number one. But also, if it's a training exercise, then why would you put out a reward for $500,000 if you know internally this was a training exercise? We should just come out and admit it's a training exercise. You can't do that now because you've made up this lie.
That's exactly why they can't do it, though, Clayton. They can't do it because the lie was made up. They've stood by the lie. The same people that work in the middle management of the FBI from 2021 are still the people that are slightly more senior or, significantly more senior. The people that surround Kash Patel, the people that are in charge, they all got promoted under Chris Wray. And we need to be really serious about what the FBI is and what it is not. And the people who got promoted within the FBI, they are still there. So this FBI and our FBI and that FBI and today's FBI, they're all the same FBI. My friends still work there. They're still decent people. I had probably one of the better whistleblowers come to me, and he actually ended up working directly for Kash Patel for a little while. He went to headquarters and tried to do some things, and he left in disgust. And the thing he said before he went there was, I do good work. The stuff that I do directly impacts my community in a positive manner, and our agency is irredeemable. And when people that have 16, 18, 20 years on the job in that particular agency have that mindset, and my friends that have just a couple of years away from retirement don't know if they're going to make it because they can't stomach what's going on, how do we keep this thing open? And all we're seeing right now is an inability to throw away that ring of power, which is what it is. It's a powerful agency that has intelligence at its disposal, and it's also got law enforcement. So they can spy on you, but they can also kill you. They can send a SWAT team through your door. They can send armed agents to come knock on your door and say, hey, you were at an anti-ICE protest. Now, I don't much care for the anti-ICE protesters, but they have a right to do that in this country. And I'm going to stand behind that right. To go knock on their door and say your name came across my desk, which is the same crap that we saw for people that had MAGA hats on during January 6th. Your name came across my desk. Ken Klippenstein has some great pieces over at his Substack right now today talking about exactly that. And I sent it to my buddies and I said, you're working for fascists. That's what these people are. They have taken the government and they have used it for their power. And the next time somebody else steps into that space, the next time Democrats grab it, they're going to use it too. And the crazy thing is nobody in the FBI is going to say no because they ran all those people out over COVID. So all of this has been very, very obvious to me as someone from the inside. But unfortunately, I'm also really angry about it. And I think more Americans should be. And I have to acknowledge my own bias there. But at the same time, like, I don't think my analysis is off, unfortunately.
No, I think you're spot on. I have a friend who worked at the FBI. He quit in protest. His boss asked him to lie, cover up a big piece of a case that he was working on. He discovered all of this fraud and abuse, and his FBI boss told him to cover it up and look the other way, and he quit. So this is the kind of rot we're talking about inside the FBI.
Well, can I say real quick, like, how this this video discredits a lot of what they put out in the Charlie Kirk case, because if they had this quality footage back then and the university has more advanced footage and they're putting out stuff that looks like a potato, this just proves that, we're not getting clear footage.
We're kind of doing apples and oranges, and there's a big chunk that needs to be acknowledged that there's an active prosecution that's going on in we don't have a subject that we can. They're still in the manhunt phase for the pipe bomber. So release whatever you have to. But at this point, it's too late. And again, I think it's probably either going to be a federal contractor, it's going to be someone that works for U.S. Capitol Police, or somebody that's in a congressional staffer role, maybe a DHS person on an outside chance. There's a really good chance that that person knows how to get in and out of the buildings of Congress, because during the hours that person accessed the building, it's not logical for it to be someone outside of law enforcement or staff. But the Charlie Kirk thing is, at this point, they cannot release more information about it because they're going to end up screwing up the case. And there's significant amounts of Supreme Court precedent that says if you prejudice the jury, then you will have, even with a successful prosecution, you'll have that verdict thrown out. So they probably actually released more than they should have. And if you guys think about any other murder case, you've never had that kind of details. I know people feel entitled to having that information at this point, and they all want to solve the case, whether they're on X or they're on Facebook or they're watching on Rumble. They think that they should be able to have access to the information to solve the case. That's not the way that our system works. As unfortunate as it is for all of our curiosity and sort of the Netflix generation that wants to be able to watch the entire season all at once and binge it, that's not the way that it works. But these are two different cases in so much as one has a subject in custody and they're going to try to do a successful prosecution. The other, we're in the hunting phase, and we're 4 years deep into the hunting phase, and they got nothing, which tells me that either our FBI is too incompetent to exist or it is too corrupt and has been lying to us. And I know for a fact that they are not too incompetent. That's the part that really troubles me. I know better, and so do both of you guys. I mean, everybody knows that, actually.
Well, we'll see if this narrative changes anymore and they try to pass off this training exercise. Kyle, great to see you as always. Thank you so much for this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet, bud.
Thanks, Kyle.